Kumlen about Gemara. Today's Monday, and hey, listen. And today's blot is Daf Samach Gimel. Samach Gimel. We'll try to go to Daf Samach Dal and base. Says the Gemara because once again says the Gemara Nazir Shigilach. Now remember, we had a whole argument. What is the pivotal moment when the Naziris ends? Is it when he takes a haircut or when he brings his kabbanis? Rabbanah said once you bring your kabbanis, it's over. Haircut is a mitzvah, but if anything happens after you brought anything has toward after you brought your kabbanis, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect retroactively your Naziris. However, Rabbi Eliezer says no, you have to wait till after your haircut. If you became tummy before your haircut, you got to start all over again. But another argument Rabbi Eliezer holds. On the very last day you became tamei, you only have to do it seven more days. You don't have to restart the whole thing, recalibrate just 7 days because you need your hair to grow a little bit to be able to go back. And the Chacham say that if on the 30th day before you brought your kabbanis, you become tamei, you got to start all over again another 30 days. So bear that in mind. Let's go to the Mishnah. Oh, another thing you have to know was we had a Gemara Pesachim that Samachede, the concept of called Tuhumas Tahim. Tuhumas Tahim is there's a tumah somewhere buried in the ground that nobody in the world, not one person in the entire world is aware of this tumah. And we had a special din when it comes to Korban Pesach, and the same thing will apply to Korban by a Nazir. That if you became tamei through a tumah's time by Korban Pesach, and you're not tamei, and you can proceed with a Korban. And by Nazir, we'll see that certain qualification. It says the Mishnah, it depends. Nazir Shigilach, he already took his haircut, and according to Rebbe, that's the most important thing. But no, then he found out that he became tamei previously, so it depends. Im tumah yedua, if it's a tumah that people knew there was a dead body, then you touched it, then say it. That's it. It cancels your Naziris, and according to Rebbe, it cancels your Naziris. But the im tumas tahim. But if it was a tumah of tahim, and this happened, you only found out after, or only happened. We'll see more later. After your haircut, ain't no say you don't start again. But what about im ad gilach? Before you took your haircut, and who says haircut is important? Rabbi Eliezer. Before you took your haircut, you found out that you became tamei. Then benkach. I don't care if it's a tumah you do, a tumah that you could have known, that people knew, or tumas tahim. So you got to start again. According to Rabbi Eliezer, 7 days. Ketzad, we'll give him an example.
He would have gone over that area before anybody knew, and then later it became known.
Exactly. So there was an earthquake and his body appeared. Ketzad, for example, Yorad Litvoil B'mari. He went to be Tovel. He was tummy from a tummy sheret, so he had to go Tovel. He went into this cave, which means it didn't interfere at all as Naziris. And then Venimta Mace Sof Al Piamaida. There was a body, a part of a body or a full body that was floating and the entrance of this cave. Tamei, he is Tamei. Why? Because it's a suffix tumah, and so the Shusha Yachid, we always machmer. But Nimtza Meshuka Bekarka Hamar, if you found that this body was buried somewhere under the ground, and it buried under the ground, then it depends. Yorad is called Tumas Tahim. Yorad Lahaka, if he went there to cool himself off, in other words, he wasn't really checking out. He wasn't really checking out to see whether there's any Tumah there. He wasn't thinking about Tumah. But he went to cool down, and right now he's tired. Then we have a suffix. What's the situation? Tired. The time of Tumas mess. If he was already tummy mess and he was going there to cleanse the Tumas mess, and the suffix, what happened? Then tummy. Shecheskas tummy, v'cheskas tired. If it was tummy till now, we assume he's still tummy. If it was tired till now, he's still tired. And remember, it's a suffix to Mrs. Yochid, so we are machmed. Because this is the rule of whenever we don't know, we look at the status quo. What was the situation till now? It says the Gemara. Says the Gemara. How do you know this whole concept? Yeah, Omar. Rabbi Eliezer, says the Pasuk, how do you know about this Tumas Tahim? If because nobody knew about it, so why would that have any impact at all? Oh, because it says the Pasuk by Nazir, by Korban Pesach we know. What about by Nazir? V'chiyamas makes all love the Pesach piece of all love. It means all of he had to know. Then the Chaver only if he knew about it. If he didn't know about it, no, it was just hidden. There's no such thing. It doesn't bother us. Reish Lakish says, it says in the Pasuk, the third day by Korban Pesach that is in Parsha Baloischa, if you were distant from Yerushalayim or you were tummy. So therefore, and talk about tummy, and it says that a road. What's the definition of a road? People are aware of this road, a familiar road. In order for the tummy to have an effect on Pesach, it has to be something which is revealed that people know about it. Says the Gemara. Now we learned what's the difference between time? Nobody in the world knows about it. If there's one person in the world who knows about it, time. So the one who says a road, there's somebody who knows that it's a road. Shop it, even though it's no longer being used, but somebody remembers it was used. The one, the first opinion, it says it has to do with you, that you have to know. It sounds like who cares what other people know, as long as you don't know about it. So what has to help us with somebody else in the world? If you, according to Drasha, Allah, if you weren't aware, then it should be tired. Number one. So, how do you explain this brayso? Everybody, how do you explain the brayso? Tanya we learned, which we'll analyze a bit further in the Gemara. You found a corpse lying there in the width of the road. You're walking down a road, you couldn't see the mace, and then later dug it up. They found there was a mace that covered the entire width of the road, which means if you walk down this path, you had to go over this mace. That means you were mile, you're oil over the mace. If it's a question of truma, then tummy. Then we'll treat you as if you are tummy. But Nazir, when it comes to Nazir, and when it comes to Asiyas Pesach, we'll say Torah. And we're talking about a tumas time that you weren't aware. Now, if it's from a pasuk, what's the difference? Truma, Nazir, Truma, Pesach. If you're not aware, it's not tummy. It's not tummy. And it must be the concept of tumas time, because it's only limited to Korban Pesach and Nazir. It does not apply to anything else. This is some kind of a tradition that we have. It's halacha Moshe Sinai. And you can't ask any questions. These are rules. Only by Nazir and only by Korban Pesach do we say that it's a teruma that nobody was aware of. It doesn't have an impact. And by Nazir, it depends when you found out about it, as we saw in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, that's halacha b'shinah. No learn from anything. This is what was given down to us. We make a distinction, and before you took a haircut, after, as if the haircut is when you end your Naziris. Mantana, who says that haircut is so vital to Naziris? That it's the haircut that holds you back. Boy, Ramacham has a lot of interesting questions throughout Shas, and then Nazir has quite a few. So and we'll have a few more soon. Ramacham has a question. What about Nitma betoich Malois? You became Tamei sometime in the middle of the 30 days. But V'noidaloi, when did you find out about it? La'achamalois, afterwards. Mao, what is the din? Basa Yedi Azlin, did we look at the time that you found out? And the fact that you found out at the end of the time, so we treat it that way, which is, let's say after the hick, whatever it is, or not. That's what he says. Now, Rashi says an interesting thing here. Rashi says that means clearly in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah makes a difference. Our Mishnah says, before haircut, after haircut, it makes no difference when it actually happened, just when you became aware. What's it even Shiloh? So Rashi says it's something which is astonishing. The last two lines of Rashi. He says, asked this question, the last two lines, didn't know this Mishnah. Now we know it says that criteria to be an Amayd is you have to know every Mishnah. They don't know Brises, but you had to know every Mishnah. And Rashi says here that Rami Bachama did not know the Mishnah, and therefore he's asking, does it contradict or does it you have to recalibrate your Naziris or not? An amazing Rashi. Tyson, everybody else learns that Rami Bachama's initial question is how Rabbi is going to explain it right now, which is basically what he's going to explain is, Rami Bachama's question is very simple. According to Rabbi Lezer, if you became tummy in the middle of your Naziris, you got to start again, full 30 days. But if you became tummy on the 30th day, on the final day, then you only have to recount 7 days. So the question is, you became tummy on day number 15, you found out day number 30. So according to Rabbi Lezer, is it 7 days or the entire 30 days? That's the shaila. Of course, you have to start again in 0. So it's very Mishnah here. The question is, what term? That's how they learn. So of course he knew the Mishnah. Anyway, now the Gemara explain it. Said Rabbi, Toshma coming here. If he did not take, the Mishnah says, if he did not take a haircut, benkach, whether it was tumas tahim, tuma yedua, so you have to start again. So it's clear the Mishnah says you have to start again. So that's what Rashi says here. The way Rashi understood his aboya, Rashi understood the question is, do you have to start again or not? Because he found out in the end when it's all over already after the haircut. So before the haircut, the last day. So he didn't know the Mishnah. But the way Rosh and everyone else learns, Rambam Chama was asking the way Rabbi understood. We'll see in a minute. Hey, what are we talking about? If he found out before the 30 days, of course you have to start again. After 30 days. Shmamina, that's what we're talking about, right? and you're still asking a question. No, but you already knew that we're talking about. You found out on the 30th day. Otherwise, what's the mission talking about? And the question is, do you cancel the entire Naziris or only 7? You look at the time that you found out. Who are you asking for? A liber Rabban hold you always start again. Even on the 30th day, you got to start again. Full 30 days. If Rabbi he says clearly, call Achamalei Shiva says, he said, if the 30th day you became Tameh, it's only 7 days. So Rabbi explains, Rabbi Chama meant to ask, that's exactly what he's asking. Maybe perhaps when does Rabbi Lezer say only 7 days? He actually became Tameh on the 30th day. So then you have to only go through the 7 days of Tahara and then you finish your Naziris. Here, over here, it happened before he became Tameh. So therefore, maybe Rabbi Lezer's Maida, he came before the end of the 30 days, the middle of the term. So maybe Rabbi Lezer's Maida, you got to restart the 30 days. We look at the time that you found out and it was afterwards. And we resolve it from the Mishnah itself, because Tony, the Mishnah says, Benkach. I don't care whether it's Tumah Yudua or Tumah Tahim, Seiser. And if we don't make the Mishnah doesn't go one step further and say, this is also the Mishnah of Rabbi Lezer, and it depends when you found out. Or it depends when you became tummy. We're talking about the 30th day, but the mission should have said, you're soisib, but how long? If it became tummy on that day, 7 days, it became tummy prior to that, 30 days. Because the mission doesn't say that, it's clear, it makes no difference. Since you found out on the 30th day, then that's considered the 30th day, and all you have to recalibrate is 7 days, and that's it, like Rabbi Eliezer. So that resolves Rambam's question. We looked in the Brisa just a few minutes ago. Say mace. You found the mace lying in the width of the road, lit truma, and you definitely walked over it, but nobody knew about this. No, it was tumas time. By truma tummy. There's no such concept of tumas time when it comes to truma. But the nazir, if you became a nazir, or oisa pesach, tar you a tar. In other words, you go ahead and bring your card pesach. When does it say? When does it say when do you say by Truma that your tameh was impossible to walk down that path without stepping over the dead body? So you were oil. Let's say there was space. Perhaps the mace only took up 3/4 of the width of that road. Then we'll say it's something Truma Shusarabim. Maybe he didn't walk over the body. Maybe he walked around it. Is after Truma time? Also for Truma, we'll say you're tired because there's something Truma in Shusarabim. What happens? The body was intact. The body was broken or in pieces. Then I feel even let's say it covers the entire width of the road. But because it's not one piece, there are gaps. And there's always a possibility that you walk between the gaps without realizing it. So it's a suffix to Rabim, and a suffix to Rabim is always tired. But we had before the idea of a cave sasun. If there's a cave that's sealed on all sides and there's a body inside, even though the body might take up only a part of that cave, the entire coffin you walk over any part of that coffin is tummy. So if there was a cave there, a grave underneath the road, not just a body strewn there, but a grave under the road, then the entire area becomes tummy. I don't care if the body filled the entire area or not. I feel meshubim footing tummy. Even if it's broken up, your tummy. The cave combines all the parts together and makes it one big area of tumah. But by medra, when we lenient, we say could be you walk between the gaps when you're walking by foot. But if you're being carried by people or in a wagon, generally you go in a straight line. So we cannot make an assumption, or it's not even a possibility that you went zigzag. Is tameh. When you're walking by foot, it's possible you didn't touch it, you didn't move it, could be you didn't touch the body, you pushed the body, or you wouldn't even hover over it. But if you were being carried or if you're riding on a wagon, it's possible you didn't move it to something there. When is all this said? That we say that we're going to be lenient, that maybe you walk between the parts and everything else only by tumas time. Only by tumas time. Sorry, when do we say that? What do you call it? Aval betuma yedua. Talking now about Nazir and Pesach. We said before that Nazir and Pesach, since you didn't know about it, tumas time. Even though you probably walked over it, you're still tired because tumas time, nobody knew about it. Aval tuma yedua. But let's say it was a tumah that somebody knew that there's a dead body there. Then shloshtan tmeim, not only tumas tamei, but nazir tamei is a pesach tamei. What's the definition of a tumah yedua? Because what's the definition? Because it's possible he didn't walk over it. So therefore you definitely tell me it's not a suffix to Mrs. Rab Mr. Kavada, because he's strewn across the entire width of the path. And as long as somebody in the world knew that this body is there, it's no longer classified Tumas times. Even Korban Pesach, even Nazir, you are Tameh. What's the definition of Eizer Tumas time? Kol she'ein makira echad b'seifa elam. Not one person in the world knows about it. Makira echad b'seifa elam. There's one person out there knows about it. Eizer Tumas time. It's no longer Tumas time. What happens if it was, let's say, hidden in straw, or in pebbles? It's possible nobody noticed it, nobody realized it. Because straw could be not nobody. No, but if it's obvious that somebody put it there, then somebody knew about it. The guy put it. But straw could be the wind blew the straw on him, or pebbles could be that pebbles the wind blew on it. So therefore nobody knows about it. But beyamim, you found him in the ocean. Ocean, usually you can see through it. Or about Thaler's dark, but when it's light, maybe somebody saw it. Or with the kick-ass slime, if there were in the cleft of the hill or something, there's rocks and there was gaps in the rock. People might have peered through it and would have seen the body there. Angel Tumas Atayim. That's not considered Tumas Atayim. There's a possibility that somebody thought it's no longer Tumas Atayim. So even by Nazir and even by Pesach, we say that if it's body strewn over the entire width of the road, definitely coming. That Tumas Atayim is only a mace, not when it comes to a sheretz or to other things. Tumas Atayim only applies to a mace.
Is there a concept of a suffix Tumas Atayim?
No, scenarios where we're saying even about that. Oh, suffix. If we can see that it was buried, then somebody had to bury him. So, but if it's buried 200 years ago, there's nobody still left in the world who knows. Do we say he passed it on? Okay, talking about it further. Then the Mishnah, we mentioned a concept called if it's floating on the water. It's called Safa. Now Safa al Mayim, we're going to say that it is Tor. Safa Mayim is Tor. If it's a suffix, if you touch it, the suffix it's Tor, and as we'll see in a minute. Says the Gemara, Safa Eina Metame Le'inya Sheretz. That if let's say there's what's the Tanya? What do you mean? If it's floating, and regarding a sheretz, it's a suffix whether you touch or not. Floating in the water, you don't become tamei. Here we talked about a mace. If it was floating in the water, a mace is a suffix. We touch it, so we said it depends. We don't know if you touch or not. So we said if you're a cheskas Torah, you're Torah. If you're cheskas tamei, you are tamei. But by a sheretz, if it's floating in the water, it's a special din that we learn from a pasuk that by a sheretz, it's floating in the water. You are Torah. Safa pnei mayim ain't a tamei in the sheretz. When it comes to sheretz, it does not become tamei. The time you learn suffix tumah, safa if it's floating. Bain bekalim. Let's say there's water inside a vessel and there's a piece of a sheretz floating in that water, and it's a suffix whether you touched it. Talk about maga now. Suffix whether you touched it or you didn't touch it. Or bain bekarka. Let's say there's a puddle of water and there's a sheretz floating in that puddle. And the subject whether you touched it or not. The din is to hear you are Torah. Special halacha that a suffix sheretz maga sheretz you are Torah. Abshima says the kalim, if there's water inside a keli and it's sitting and floating there, then tameya it is tummy. But bekarka Torah. But mekarka, we say that what? The pasuk is limiting only if there's a puddle of water on the ground, there's a sheretz, there's something whether you touch it or not, you are Torah. So most like my time to what's the story? It says you have two sukkim. They seem to contradict each other. We're trying to reconcile them. One pasuk says, "Do not in any way defile yourself." Bechol hasheretz hasheretz in any of these creeper crawlies, anywhere where they crawl around, become tummy. So it says bechol hasheretz. It doesn't matter where they crawl, right? And it become tummy. But come up to the sheretz anywhere they control. They could, but then it says, Uksiv, another pasuk says, this is the following is tummy by sheretz and sheretz, ala oretz, only if it crawls on the ground. Okay, so one pasuk anyway they crawl up on the ground. Okay, this is how it works. Vada magoi, if you definitely touch a sheretz, there's nothing to talk about. Wherever the sheretz is, you touched it. I don't care where it is, you tummy. Suffix magoi, the suffix whether you touched it, then it depends. Depends. If it's on the ground, then you tummy. But if it's in the water, you are tired. You are tired. That's what the Tanakh says. It doesn't matter whether it's the water on the ground, whether it's in the water in the keli, you're tired. Rab Shimon limits it further only if it's water on the ground. And why is that? My time, what's this water? There's another passage. It says, Ach, Mayin. It says if you have a spring and a boir, you will become tired. And then it said, but if you touch in the valley, you become tummy. It says, Ach, Mayin. So the water, it says tired. But see, in the very same passage, it said that water also you can become tummy. Okay, it said. So it depends where the water is. So for big kalim, if the water was sitting in a keli and this sheretz was floating in a keli, it's a suffix whether you touch it or not, then tummy. The pasuk says tummy. But the pasuk is talking about achmayin, if it's a spring or directly in the water. But the karka, if the water is in the ground, like a mayan, and there's a piece of sheretz floating, there's a suffix or not, then you are tired. Says the Gemara, so we're now talking about this concept of something, a sheretz and a suffix maga. Another halacha, we have to do psukim. A sheretz that is a suffix if you touch it or not. If it's not stationary on the ground, but it is because dead sheretz. But if it's floating in the water, it doesn't matter where the water is, you are tired. So we're gonna have a number of questions on this. Some of them very similar to Gemara we had in Shabbos. Start by learning. Kol hanitolin, anything which a human hand is holding, or nigorin, a human hand is schlepping, and a shadow, let's say, and tzfeikan, you, the other person doesn't know whether they touched or not. Then tummy is considered as if it's stationary. Why is it stationary? Because it's sitting in the hand. The hand is moving. They're sitting there. Although the hand is rocking, if somebody threw a sheretz, so there's nobody holding it, then it's mobile. It's mobile. Is fake and tired. It's just like the case of the water. It's not in stationary in one place, and therefore a suffix is tired. It's tired. Yes. So it's not when the Gemara said before water. We don't necessarily mean water. We mean if it's mobile. If the sheretz that you have a suffix you touch it as mobile, either it's floating in the water, or because it's floating in the air. And as Rashi says, we don't say klutu commercial huncha, which is like principle we learn in Shabbos that if it's floating in the air, according to Akiva, as if it's resting on the ground. We don't say that here, so it's mobile. Therefore, suffix we have these psukim mistar because it's ala oretz, only if it's stationary. Says the Gemara, chutzmin, only maga, only the maga. Chutzmin, as Gemara say right now, chutzmin a kazayis, except the kazayis. Except for kazayis of a mace. If it wouldn't have been a sheretz, this is only by a sheretz, a rodent. But if it's a body, a corpse, a part of a kazayis of a corpse, or hamayil al pnei tumah, not a question of whether you touched it, but it's a question of whether you hovered over it, or v'chol davar shemetame malmayla kalamata, anything which is metame above and below, which is the idea of oil above or below. Lasuya zova zova, because if they're sitting, anything underneath them becomes tame, anything above them becomes tame. All of those things, if it's a suffix, then the din is that you are machmis. Only by a sheretz and only a suffix maga. Yeah, says the Gemara. Boy, Ramachama has an interesting question. Now, what I just said only by sheretz is the way the Rambam learns. The other Rishonim learn even a mace, but if it's a question of maga, of touching, the same thing applies. If it's in the water or in the air. So, for example, right here, mace bekeli. We're goydus mace, and the Rambam's version is sheretz. Because according to the Rambam, this whole din of floating on the water, the special pasuk, is only limited to sheretz. And we say it's not limited to sheretz, limited to the tumah of maga, of touching. And the question is as follows: what happens if the kazayis is sitting inside a keli, and the keli is floating on the water? Do we look at the keli? Look at the water. As far as the keli is concerned, the piece is sitting in one place. But if you look at the water, it's moving. How do we view that? Mace bekeli. So the mace is not directly on the water; it's sitting inside a keli, and the keli is floating on the water. Mao, what's it in then? Do we say basik kli as linen? And the way most of Shainim learn, if you look at the keli, the sheretz is stationary, therefore a suffix if you touch it or not. If you touch that keli, you become tamei. Or basar misas linen or mayas linen. You go after the water, and if you go after the water is moving, so it's moving on the suffix tire. The Rosh learns exactly the opposite. If you look at the keli, he says, then you are definitely tamei because the keli is moving. If you look at the water is, or his gift is misa, then or the water is still.
Misa mean the dead body?
The corpse, the kazayis.
That's what I thought first. That makes sense. Because the dead body is in the keli. That's what's not moving. The keli.
I'll just quote to the Rosh here. What was the Rosh? Yeah. He said, do we look at the keli and the keli is floating? Or do we look at the mace and the mace is in one place? But the way everyone else learns, go way around. If you look at the keli, then the mace inside the keli is stationary. And if you look at the water, It's moving. Okay, but the idea is the same. What do we view? What do we look at? Thinking about it further, in Tim Salami, you can tell me Basa Kayla and you can tell me we're going to look at the Kayli. We know we'll say what? Don't consider stationary. What about mace? Again, mace or sheretz, two versions, the Rambam and everybody else. Mace, al gabi sheretz. What happened if sitting on top of a sheretz? Now, sheretz also generates tumah. Do we view it as two separate, disparate things, and therefore it's like sitting in a keli and a stationary? Or do we say, no, it's all tumah, and therefore it's as if the mace itself is floating on the water? Mao, keeping the high tumah is out of a high tumah shiva. On the one hand, we'll say that they have two different laws of tumah. This is a tumah only for a day. This is a tumah for the 24 hours. Command the machta tumah b'keidam is as if the tumah is sitting inside a keli, so therefore it's stationary, and we should be machmir if you something we touched it or not. It's a dilma, or perhaps tumah samichti. It's one thick tumah, and therefore it's as if the kazayis of the corpse is also sitting on the water. The im timflam, if you can tell me. Command the machta tumah, the keli damya. If you can tell me, no, it's as if it's sitting in the keli, and therefore it's stationary. The tame vadai, and therefore you are tame, because we said before, if it's stationary and it's a suffix, whether you touch or not, you tame vadai, tame. What about sheretz and vela? You have a sheretz sitting on a vela, and they're both only tame till that evening. Well, how do we view that? The vela suffer. And the veil is floating on the water. Mahu. Do we say kiva the tavai tumas eder because they both have the same laws of tumas, as if it's one thick tumah, and therefore as if the piece on top is floating directly on the water as well. It's as if it's one big piece of tumah. In tumas smith is a thick tumah. Or dilma high kizai because the laws are different. Not in the length of time that you tame, but the size that generates it. By a shed, it's the size of a lentil, and by a mace, it's the size of a kazai. So two different things. Like this, the mace is sitting on top of something which is on top of the water, not directly on the water. What about sheretz and gabi sheretz? Let me ask another question. What about a sheretz on top of another sheretz? Hani vadechat shirinu. It's definitely all the same. It's one. It's as if the top sheretz is sitting directly on the water. Even the miftik in madad. The fact is, it's not sitting on the water. There's another sheretz in between, intersecting it. No. The im things that you're going to argue, sheretz and gabi sheretz, and sheretz on top of sheretz. Kiva the miftik madadi, because the fact is that the sheretz above is not sitting directly in the water. Is command the manche bekedum as if it's sitting on something and it's stationary. So I'm asking a question. What about sheretz al gabi nevela shenimucha? You have an avela that dissolved, turned into liquid. It started out as a solid, so if it would have been a solid, then we already declared that the sheretz on top is not sitting directly in the water, sitting on a avela. But the avela that turned into water. How do we view that? Mao. Do we say that since now the avela dissolves and therefore it's just fluid, it's as if the sheretz on top is sitting directly in the water? It's because it started out as an avela, it's still considered food, even though it's liquid. It's still treated as a food. So it's as if the sheretz is sitting on top of something, which that something is sitting on top of the water, and therefore the sheretz is not sitting directly on the water. The im tim if you can tell me, yes, you're going to argue, yes, that is considered food, and therefore the sheretz is not sitting directly in the water. And if the suffix we touch the sheretz or not, you are tired. What about sheretz? If a sheretz happens to be sitting on semen, how do we use semen? How do we use semen? Do we say is semen considered as if it's liquid? Or do we it came in the body as a form of liquid? Or do we say no, it's a different matter altogether, and therefore the sheretz is not sitting directly on the water? The intim tzalaimer, if you're going to argue, there is akra, since it's left the person's body, now has an entity, an entity of its own, then sheretz agab mechatas. What happens if you have the water of a chatas, which has ashes in it as well, and the sheretz sitting on top of that? Is it sitting on water, and therefore suffix if you touch it or not, you are tired? Or do we say that it's sitting on top of something, and therefore suffix you touch your tummy? Mechatas is floating on water. Mao lo yadinim, we don't know. Teku, Teku. And we had a number of cases where Rambam Chama asked all these very interesting questions.